I would like to invite a panel up. We're going to complete the pivot that Marisa started towards Canadian policy. So Katie Sullivan, come on up. Katie's the Managing Director of the International Emissions Trading Association. Philippe Dunsky, I think I saw Philippe, there he is. President of Dunsky Energy and Climate Advisors. And Rachel Doran, President and Executive Director of Clean Energy Canada. So we've got a great panel here to talk in the shadow of Parliament Hill about the implications of some of these big changes globally that Michael has introduced for us. So welcome all, thanks for joining us. Let me start with a quick rapid fire to take the temperature. You've heard Michael's story about what's happening. You've been tracking these issues yourselves in your day jobs. One word, how optimistic are you about Canada's ability to prosper in this new world? Rachel, let's start with you.
You offer one word, I'm going to give you three.
Cheating, but I'll allow it.
Promising, but realistic.
I'm a good student, so cautiously. One word.
I go to cautiously optimistic.
Okay, I'll let you elaborate a little bit. Let's go reverse order. Katie, tell me briefly why you think that.
If you've been around this space long enough in Canada on the climate policy front, you have seen some incredible success and some incredible leadership and innovation. You also have had your heart broken sometimes along the way. I think for many reasons that Michael clearly laid out, it's a new world order. There's a lot of shifting that is going on, and Canada is very, very well positioned to fill a really critical leadership role on climate policy. And again, my space on the carbon market side, that is, I think, desperately needed. And the number of messages that were received through Prime Minister Carney's speech in Davos, that really, it was tremendous. Those that said, Canada, we do need you, the world needs you, there's opportunities for Canada. And so I think that there is a window here to lean in and for Canada to play that role as a middle power. And that there are opportunities that could be seen, and we would desperately hope not to squander that.
Philippe?
So we had the same answer, right? Cautiously optimistic. The cautious part of this is maybe a little born of a little frustration that actually comes from a lot of what Michael was just saying. Like, we have amazing cards in Canada. We're in the midst of a global race that is the energy transition, and I don't think there are many places that have as good cards as we do. We're also way ahead. Like, we're starting further ahead than anyone. I mean, just in terms of our clean electricity, right? We're second in the G7. We're third in the G20. So we're starting out with this huge competitive advantage. And the frustration that I have is that we're at risk of squandering that because we're not moving quickly on it. We're at times backtracking. And meantime, the rest of the world, save for our friends to the south, are racing forward. So that's the cautious part. The optimistic part is quite frankly, this is a moment in time. We're in this global moment where I feel like finally we might be able to move fast, right? Like, we move at this horrible, slow pace in Canada and getting big stuff done. We just don't like getting big stuff done. I feel like we may be in a moment now where we can get big stuff done, and I'm particularly hopeful in having a prime minister who deeply understands electricity and a clerk of the Privy Council, my old client Michael Sabia, who deeply understands electricity and thinks big. That's the optimistic side.
We're going to come back to electricity in a minute, but I'll let Rachel get in first.
Oh, I think Michael already stole my deck of cards analogy, so I 100% agree. That is the promising part. It's those cards, and I think you've named really well what Canada's going for it. And I think it's been already stated what some of the challenge here is. We're looking at those graphics about the rest of the world, and we're not winning. And I think maybe sometimes in Canada we think we're further ahead compared to where the world already is, and so we just need to move fast.
Okay, I want to get specific. I want to get anchored in some imminent policy decisions that we know are going to happen here in Canada. One of the first ones, we know that the federal government is planning an electricity strategy. So Philippe, I want to go to you. You're one of Canada's leading electricity experts. You chaired the Grid Council. What needs to happen in the electricity strategy? What is the policy plank needed to enable that growing electricity system to meet the challenge that Michael's laid out for us?
So, a few things. A few things. Like really high level, there are fundamentally three things that we need to do. It's really simple. We need to build, we need to save, and we need to optimize. Right? And so the build is like, build, baby, build. Of course, build clean. So we have to build out an awful lot of clean electricity infrastructure, and that's obvious. Excuse me. The save part, same thing. We're like hamsters on a wheel if all we do is build as fast as we can, but then we keep wasting all this electricity. So we have to close up those gaps and use that electricity more wisely. But the third thing I want to hone in on is optimize, right? Because, and Michael again talked about it when he was talking about the hydrogen challenge, right? It's not that there's so many good things to do, but we can't do them all with the same capital and with the same time, with the same energy. So we need to choose our battles. Optimizing our systems becomes really important, and I know that's really boring and unsexy language, but we have this ridiculous situation in the country where we're a small country, and we've got 10 provinces, 3 territories, and everyone uses their electricity fundamentally in autarky, right? Fundamentally, we're each our own islands. And it's like I go back to, the debates around free trade 40 years ago, and we got over that, and we kind of figured out that actually we can all do a lot better. We can all benefit when we're trading, and yet we don't do that in Canada. So, like, I have one of the newest members of our team, Chris O'Reilly. He was recently the CEO at BC Hydro, and he and I were talking a couple of years ago. I called him, actually, because I was really frustrated, and I said, I don't understand, why are you in BC, why are you looking to build all sorts of wind power in BC when wind speeds are almost twice as high in neighboring Alberta? Meaning, you can get the same wind power for, let's say 30-40% cheaper all in. And there wasn't really an answer, right? And he and I talked about that, and at the time, the real answer was, it was kind of institutional and historic and political BS, because we don't believe in trading, because we want to keep our islands. And he ended up, and just to be clear, like, Chris worked a lot on that, on opening that up, and got really far with Alberta. And I have hope that post electricity strategy, maybe post MOU, we might actually get to trading. But all of that is to say, we need to build out interprovincial transmission infrastructure. It's not the be-all and end-all solution. It's one tool for the toolbox, but we need to be getting our clean electricity where it's cheapest, where the resources are greatest, and getting that to where demand is, irrespective of our provincial borders. So that's certainly one thing. I'll add one other thing. There's so many, right? But if I can just hone in on 2. So one, interprovincial transmission. The other is dollars, and federal dollars in particular, or even more broadly, taxpayer dollars. Like, this whole thing that we're talking about, when we talk about doubling the size of electricity, it's huge costs involved. And with the affordability crisis or discussions that we've got now, like, we cannot afford to be raising electricity rates dramatically, or we will lose people. So we need to get to some sort of a balance between ratepayer dollars and taxpayer dollars footing the bill for a lot of this build out.
Rachel, you want to pick up on the last thread? We've talked about rates before. Your organization's done work in thinking about exactly that challenge, about how to build this system without spiking rates. Any more advice to build on Philippe's on how to do that?
I mean, I think this is the critical question. The first piece is we need to focus on this for every reason that you've just described, and I think you've raised two really good ones. Another one is, like, the grid of tomorrow doesn't have to look like the grid of today, and so we need to be exploring things like demand-side management, like using virtual power plants, like we're thinking of this in a static way, and we're living in an era of smart technology. It's going to be dynamic, and it's going to save money. We can't have inertia to build from the status quo. I think second, we need to start from the cheapest resources. So we've seen the costs of batteries, renewables, like try to figure out how far we can get with those cheaper resources, and then build around it. Third was going to be, yes, like, this can't sit on ratepayers entirely. We need a nation-building approach to kind of put some money behind this. And fourth, it matters how much electricity rates, but it matters even more, as Michael points out, how does it compare to the other alternatives? So we need to stop incentivizing the fossil fuel option through any way that we can and see how we can tilt the scales more towards favoring electricity.
Katie, every time I talk to you, you're somewhere internationally exotic, and you seem to be always in a new place talking to new people. Given that your members are international, given that you're seeing international experience, what do you want to add on this electricity question on international best practices?
I hear Philippe talk about just please have more harmonization and alignment. Don't be islands within Canada. And I'm just like, have you met the carbon markets here in Canada? And I mean, it is a challenge, and we can dig a bit deeper into that. I will say, and I guess more riffing off of Michael's presentation, I am delivering those presentations on the regular with the flags. They pop up, and every year there's more that pops up with respect to carbon pricing and markets and compliance, and these governments taking it extremely seriously, including, again, many of these markets that Canada wants to access. And across all of those, again, in the compliance government carbon pricing world, the majority of those do have a market component to it, and they're covering industry and they're covering power sector. So there are certainly loads of best practices and experiences across carbon markets, pricing generally, about whether it's revenue recycling or helping consumers, with a higher cost. I mean, when you look at the EU ETS, I've been a fangirl of NEF since the beginning, and know Guy Turner very well. Yeah, but that's the OG, right? The EU ETS, phase 1, 2005. And I mean, that is where you had the power sector that for a long time, it was a big price signal that had decarbonized the power sector. Now it's getting real with the industry, right? And we're gonna have to, it's the ETIE, harder to debate. This is like the trigger to CBAM, which again is also maybe part of the discussion in a bit, Dale. But California, another great example on the electricity side, and carbon credits or rebates to consumers so they could actually see the impact, to the bill or the benefit of the recycling component. So there's, on the electricity side, lots of experiences globally on, carbon markets and best practice that more and more governments are looking at and exchanging and moving forward.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Okay, climate policy is also evolving, and there's also ongoing conversations about what changes we might see or need to see to Canadian climate policy. So Rachel, I want to go to you because Michael's final word for us was electrification, and it was a call to create the incentives for switching to electricity. Arguably, there's a bit of a gap in current Canadian climate policy for consumers, for households. What do you think? What's needed?
Well, Michael said it's a provocation, so I'm going to make the case for consumers here and say why I think it's important.
Please.
So, I mean, this is not only just the direct emissions we're going to get, but I think when you look at studies, ours included, about what impacts people's decisions to kind of embrace a clean technology, like the number one reason is they know someone who already has them. And so this is the way we can kind of access and make people feel like they're involved in this energy transition. It's not like global statistics, it's their next door neighbor talking to them. And so, like, I think that's why electric vehicles are so far, they're the first case. There's, what's going to be the easiest to succeed. They're where the total cost of ownership lies. And I think the auto strategy that the government recently released is an interesting approach to trying to address the barriers, incentives for upfront cost, support for charging, but then some regulatory support because we need some market transformation in Canada. It's not ready. We need something else on the household side, not only because the cost is going to be easy, but to help people feel this in their own home. And that could look like, what we get from EV incentives is it's easy. You can get a heat for service where a utility or a contractor shows up at your house, is able to provide a low to no interest loan for you and can help deliver some of those things into your home. So I think in the opportunities in the upcoming electricity strategy, as Canada thinks about really implementing its carbon competitiveness strategy, just really focusing on people will save money over time, but only if they're getting access to some of these electrification technologies in their home and can kind of embrace it themselves.
Philippe, it's really hard to separate electricity supply and demand given how they interact. So do you want to weigh in on this consumer-facing side of things?
I really do, but actually, do you mind if I kind of pivot a little bit?
We'll see if I need to cut you off, but for now, yes.
All right. I want to take a slightly different angle, industrial and economic growth angle. So right now, I'm always surprised at how little this is understood right now. Canada is currently short in electricity. Right? It's not in every province, but in many provinces we are short on electricity, and specifically on clean electricity. And what that means is that we are currently at a moment when our economy is under threat, under pressure. We are currently saying no, right? We're currently in the business of saying no to countless industries, countless companies that want to set up shop in Canada or expand existing operations because what they need is clean electricity. They come to Canada thinking that we've got plenty of it, and it turns out we don't. We're short, right? This is a really big problem. So I have clients in BC, right? BC is currently saying no to companies that want to set up shop or expand because of lack of clean electricity. Quebec is saying no, every month, saying no, right? We had a pipeline at one point of about 20,000 megawatts of requests for industrial expansion and new operations. In other words, thousands upon thousands of jobs. We're saying no to. I had clients, I was working with Manitoba at one point. They were having to say no to new industry going to come into Manitoba because they were out of clean electricity. This is the thing that everyone wants now. This is the thing that Canada had in abundance, and we've been sitting on it and biding our time, and now we've lost that. And we're having to say no, and we're losing real economic opportunities. That, to me, is just enormously frustrating. So my firm just actually did a study. I don't know if it's come out or it's coming out soon for Share that tried to put a number to that, and our numbers, something in the range of 110 to 200 billion dollars of GDP, of economic opportunity in Canada that is currently at risk if we don't get our act together and build and or save, free up enough clean electricity to get all this, to support all this economic activity. So I just wanted to add that one in because sometimes we're not thinking about it, we're not hearing about it, but believe me, our utilities and provincial governments are, and it's a travesty.
That's a great addition, Philippe. Thanks for that. Katie, there's one more big policy announcement or event that's on the horizon, and that is this April 1st deadline for an MOU, and a memo of understanding between Ottawa and Alberta. And there's lots of pieces wrapped up into that possible MOU, and we can unpack some of those if we want, panel. But Katie, I want to go to you first with one of the biggest ones, which is stabilizing TIER. That's the industrial carbon pricing system in Alberta. You've got lots of members in Alberta. You think about this market a lot. How do we fix that market? What does that MOU have to do to deliver that plank for climate and electricity policy?
Thanks for the softball question and recognizing
I'm here for you.
Very much the audience and recognizing there's a lot of things that we don't know, but also time's a ticking. And there are many that are watching this space actively, as you said, including not just members here in Canada, but also globally, investors, and some who are here even today, who are wondering, how the tier price and the tier market might evolve, provide some stabilization, provide some durability. Keep in mind, my dad always says, like, know your history. Again, when we look at the history of compliance carbon markets in this country, Alberta has been around since 2007. And when we see a lot of experience and successes on carbon markets that are showcased globally and learnings, Alberta is one, Quebec is another. Hats off, right, to Quebec and the California link. With respect to the MOU, I mean, there are some really key components that could see more, say, elegant solutions. We see the $130 a ton, right? There's still maybe some unknowns, but we are looking at the marginal effective carbon price, where there is, interest anticipation. What does that possibly look like? The discussion around the link to the benchmark assessment, obviously, is a big question. What decisions could be made around tier through the MOU, but also could impact the benchmark assessment decisions, or vice versa, and how other provinces and their output-based pricing systems, or I should say broadly, industrial carbon markets, are reformed or deemed equivalent. There's a lot that is resting on some of these decisions that have to be made, hopefully not in too much of a rush job, let's say, but the companies, be it compliance entities, be it investors, be it project developers, are desperate for some stabilization. And I'll just throw, there are, when I say elegant solutions, these siloed, for instance, as we discussed earlier, these siloed carbon markets across Canada, the 8 or 9, including the federal carbon markets, where there is no proper link harmonization. I mean, there has been attempts, but we haven't actually seen a lot of fungibility across these programs, right? Which is a nightmare, certainly for those who have assets or investments across, or compliance obligations across these markets. The other thing I'll say is the international space, and where Canada does have a lot of getting its own house in order domestically, but there has been a lack of connectivity around the international markets, and that is on Paris, Article 6, despite you playing a critical role, Catherine McKenna playing a critical role in 2015 and gaveling things through, including seeing an Article 6 component to the Paris Agreement. Canada has not really deemed what its strategies are engaged around that table. There's also thriving, potentially more thriving voluntary carbon market as well for possible demand sources that could come from Canada broadly or Alberta specifically. I do think that there has to be a real focus on the competitiveness, also ensuring the affordability piece to how some of these changes are made down the line. So there is a lot in line that could actually have broader ripple effects, including across our community, at home and internationally.
Who else wants it on the MOU? I can see it in your eyes that you guys do.
Well, there's a lot of divergent views in this room, so I'm looking forward to our reception afterwards when people can tell me how wrong I am. But in the spirit of growing the clean, I'm not going to talk about the pipeline. I'm going to talk about the things in there that I think could make a real difference, like a stringent $130 price point that actually gets things built in the ground, that moves projects forward, that could have impact. An Alberta-BC intertie could have some real impact. And I think there's whether or not we get to an agreement kind of on what does clean electricity look in this country that starts sending a signal to avoid natural gas lock-in, to move natural gas towards peakers, these are all important. And I guess my hesitation is being trained as a lawyer a really long time ago, the only thing I can remember about negotiation is don't negotiate with anyone who doesn't want to negotiate with you, and make sure you have a best alternative to a negotiated agreement. So just making sure for all the folks in this room who are involved in the federal government, we already negotiated a lot here. We can't walk back some of those really important grow the clean pieces potential.
I like everyone's staying true to character. Philippe and Katie keep their economist cards intact by promoting the gains from trade, and Rachel lawyers talking about negotiation theory. It's all coming together. Philippe, you want in?
I mean, honestly, I think Rachel said it really well. Don't negotiate against yourself. It's a pretty simple negotiating rule, right? In the case of electricity that I happen to know a couple of things about, I was really surprised to see us negotiating away, potentially anyhow, the CER in Alberta, which, if we do that in Alberta, then, the whole, just pull the string, right? We know what comes. So I don't really understand that, I have to say, unless you get a real industrial carbon price that actually applies to all emissions from the power sector. Now, if you do that, you're okay. If you do that, it's fine. But if all we're talking about is a carbon price that applies to a few tons above a threshold that is, a gas power plant, then I don't think we're getting anywhere. So
let's zoom out a little bit. We've talked about, in Michael's context, with the age of electricity and these big geometric growth changes that are accelerating. Take me bigger. Take me up and down the supply chain for clean electricity. Where are Canada's opportunities beyond just producing and using electricity?
So many, right? And again, Michael touched on it in the cards. We've got an enormous country. We've got an enormous country with extraordinary resources, and we have not built out so much of that supply chain. Funny, we're just actually beginning work for CanRIA on this issue. But I'll give you one example, all right? Just one. Transformers. Really boring, right? If I want to just bore everyone and get everyone to fall asleep, I'll talk to you about electricity transformers, all right? The boxes, these silver boxes So transformers, strangely enough, have now become a massive bottleneck globally in the electricity system. You can't get enough of them fast enough. And if you can't get transformers, you can't build out your grid, you can't add new generation, you can't build out string up the lines to get the power to consumers, et cetera. So these, transformers have become really important. We now have something like 3, 5, 7-year wait times to get transformers. So, we want to go really fast and build this whole thing out and double the size of our system, within 25 years, but we can't get the transformers. So I, as you might be able to tell, I get really frustrated easily, and when I get frustrated, I pick up the phone and I call. And so the other day I called the CEO of a transformer company. I said, so why are you not doubling, tripling your size, because this demand is endless? And I work with some investors, and I say, if it's capital, I can connect you with capital. And I found it really interesting. He said, no, actually the problem is amorphous steel. Now I'm really going to bore everyone. So we don't just need any kind of steel. We need amorphous steel, a specific type of steel, to meet new regulations. The regulations make sense, but there's not enough of the amorphous steel around. So that's a bottleneck in the supply chain. But wait a second. Canada produces steel. Hamilton, thank you, Catherine, produces steel. We produce a bunch of steel, right? But we don't produce the specific kind that's going to add enough to our, couple of transformer companies. So we can really focus in on that and ramp up our steel production, adjust it to produce the amorphous stuff, to build out our transformer industry, to double, triple the output of transformers to enable our electricity build-out. That is one example, and I could go on forever, but again, everyone's going to fall asleep, so I'll shut up now.
I was an excellent example, but forever isn't necessary. We're going to open up to audience questions in a minute, but before I do that, I want each of the panelists to finish with a prescription. We talked at the beginning of our diagnosis of where things were at, but I'm going to impose some scarcity. You can't give me a lot of recommendations. You have to choose one. If you have one piece of advice, one policy recommendation for the federal government to implement soon, what is it? Rachel, you get to go first.
Well, there's so many, but I'm going to go with one that may be unexpected. I'm going to say our brand new committed to tailpipe emission standards. And I'm going to say that because I think there's a lot of the architects of Canada's current approach to electricity and climate in the room, but this was, a brand new approach. We have committed to, redesigning a policy on electric vehicles. And I think, we heard Michael say transportation is something we need to focus on in this country. We've seen that's, the canary in the coal mine. Like that's, if you can't succeed on that, are we going to succeed on other pieces? And I think we need some real market transformation in that space to ensure that electric vehicles succeed in Canada and are leading that kind of leading edge of the energy transition. And so we just need it done fast, and we need it done on the trajectory that was committed to. And I think that's a bit of a legacy as well around how this government is going to kind of approach the redesign of policy and see where that is signaling it heads.
Philippe, how about you?
So I want to come back to the, this is a moment in time thing. My number one recommendation to anyone in this is a bit of a mind shift. Like we really need to shift our thinking on this and get to thinking big, which we're not used to doing. But this is the moment to think big. What we're doing right now in defense is exactly what we need to be doing in energy, right? What we're doing in defense was wildly ridiculous, or at least viewed as such, 1 year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago. Today, we're doing it, right? Or at least we're on the verge of doing it. We need the same thing for energy. Like honestly, if I take a step back and I try to take off my energy hat and just look at the world and look at what Canada needs to really lean into in a really big way and use the fiscal room, whatever fiscal room we've got now to lean into with big dollars, it's probably two things. It's defense and it's energy. And on the energy side, it is electricity. And it's building out the system.
Katie, last word to you before questions from the audience.
Yeah, aside from preserving all of that leadership and the innovation that's come before on the carbon market side of things, making sure that there is a diplomatic carbon mission even around the championing of low carbon products, very real low carbon products, low carbon supply chains. We are seeing the remaking of world order, the vacuum of power being filled very, very quickly across climate and trade activities. And there are opportunities, including, and I have to bring it back, Dale, to just, maybe it's because I've been so immersed in the definitive period for the carbon border adjustment mechanism in the EU and how that is very much a trigger. It is real around embedded carbon. It is seeking actual data on emissions at this stage. It is cement, steel, fertilizer. It's a handful, only a bit, but only a bit right now Canada's facing. But there is a proposal to go much broader to downstream products and complex, products and goods. Canada is so extremely well positioned to be a part of, this, and is well prepared already in its own domestic system and programs. And so to not, again, going back to squandering that and really championing it with government, federal, provincial, the industry, capital allocators in Canada, I think it's really critical. It's really critical.
Okay, my colleague Dean has a microphone. There he is. So if you'd like to ask a question to the panelists, then pop your hand up and we will work through a few of them. I think I see one there. And maybe just state your name before your question, please.
Hello, my name is Aya. My question is for Philippe. You mentioned that if we grow supply without addressing this, saving energy, it's like being on a hamster's wheel. If we see, with this focus on major projects, building big from the Carney government, if we see a focus on supply side and maybe less so on demand side in the upcoming electricity strategy, what do you think are going to be some of the bigger picture consequences for our country?
So it's a really interesting question, right? One of the challenges that I have in answering that question is the division of powers. And the feds can do a lot more on the supply side and on the infrastructure side than they can on the demand side. So just in terms of the federal strategy, I would expect more on the supply side, but it can't ignore the demand side, right? There's a lot that can be done around codes, around standards, around electrification of end uses, to Michael's point, which in and of itself is is probably the single biggest thing that we could do for energy efficiency to get overall demand down. So the feds can definitely do stuff there. ITCs, for example, currently apply generally to the supply side. They can apply to a lot of demand side pieces as well, like industrial heat pumps, industrial heat batteries, things like that can be rolled into the ITCs, and you can actually get some real benefits there. So a lot can be done. What happens if we don't do it? Well, it's like usual. I mean, we'll end up paying more than we need to for our energy services, and it'll just not be as good for the economy as it could. Like I started out, I'm actually the co-chair of Efficiency Canada. I started out my career focused on energy efficiency. I believe deeply in energy efficiency, but I also think that we need to do both now simultaneously. The question is on a 50-50 basis, it's really hard to answer that because it depends what the measurement is, right? If it's dollars, probably not, because you need to spend more dollars on building out supply than you do on dropping demand right now. That's how big the growth is. But there's so much that you can do on the demand side to minimize waste, free up those electrons. Here's what I would really like. The real answer is everything that we can do to free up electrons that costs less than what it costs to build new, we should be doing. And much of that lies in the hands of provinces, but not everything. And the feds can do. So I would hope that the feds will do everything that they can to maximize or to optimize, the efficiency opportunities there. I don't think it's 50-50.
More questions? Quiet crowd. Well, you think I'll throw one into the mix. There's one there, actually.
Hi, my name is Cheryl. I was wondering, because I've read that affordable energy is more affordable, or renewable energy is more affordable, and actually reduces the cost of energy. But I think if I understood correctly, you were talking about how the transition to cleaner energies could be more expensive for households. And in the affordability crisis, we need to be aware of that. So I was just wondering if you could elaborate more on that and explain maybe a little bit why it would be more expensive for households. Is that a long-term problem, or is it a short-term increase in the price that over time would actually end up being more affordable?
Is that to me?
To whomever feels that they can best answer the question.
I can start. I'll go quickly. You want to add into there? Okay, so let me just clarify, right? I certainly mentioned before that we need to be really careful about not raising electricity prices too high, right? But affordability is not just prices, right? It's prices times consumption. Like the energy bill ultimately is what matters. We can do this with effectively zero impact on energy bills. All right, that is absolutely doable. Why? Because of what Michael talked about before, right? An EV consumes 3 times less energy than an ICE car to drive the same distance. A heat pump consumes 3 times less energy than a furnace to produce the same heat. So the capital, like this stuff costs more at the outset, and then the operating costs are lower. The net result, and we actually did work on this, and I'm just looking here, Transition Accelerator, I think Mo is here and others from a Transition Accelerator here. Mo can talk to you endlessly about the Energy Wallet and the analysis that was done on Energy Wallet that found that ultimately you actually end up with a net benefit for consumers if we do all this. All that being said, we still need to keep electricity prices down, not because it actually matters to pocketbooks. It doesn't. What matters to pocketbooks is bills, not rates, but because it matters politically. Because the second rates go up, that's what ends up at the headliner, and that's where we lose people and lose support. So that's certainly what I was talking about in terms of sharing the burden between taxpayers and ratepayers.
No, I think you've done a great job of responding. I guess I would only add, like, I think the Climate Institute did some research saying, you know, if we do everything we need to by 2050, people are actually going to save money for all the reasons you've described. If you electrify your house, if you're using these electrified appliances, you know, if we're building the grid out with what you're describing as renewables that are producing energy at a lower cost, but have some different ways they're contributing to the grid, I think the challenge is just we have to build, and we have to build quickly. And so that's some of what Philippe, I think, is saying is we can't just allow those quick price spikes because we're building more than we have in the past. We've had a grid that's very static for a long time to maybe impact people's like perspective and support for the work that we're doing.
Does you questions?
Hi, Jen Hiscock. This is the safe side of the room to ask questions. They're
Apparently.
all terrified over there.
You guys are winning. This side of the room is doing better.
Exactly. So I just wanted to pick up on the comments around where you're seeing a lot of looking for industrial demand growth, be it data centers or manufacturing in this country, and looking at how those deals come together. The federal tools will be around capital investment, but there's always a need to see equal investment from the provinces in the area, and then that's finally where we get this negotiation around power, and are we going to have enough capacity to be able to support these things? Are you seeing some traction or some activity in any of your dealings where there's discussions around how grid-friendly can this demand be? Is there some flexibility? You know, listening to New York Climate Week, there was some ideas posited around, well, could we get data centers to pay for heat pump electrification programs then? Like, just, here's the money, you go take it in this service territory so that you can drop that peak, and then I get it instead.
A few threads there. We have some federalism as well as some data center threads to pick up.
I love talking about data centers these days. So, and by the way, let me just preface it by this is a sovereignty issue too, right? We actually need data sovereignty, and because of that, we actually need data centers here. And right now, we don't have enough electricity for them, so that's the same old conversation. Yes, we can modulate demand to a degree, right? Data centers, so we work with a lot of utility clients now, and some data center developers as well, some hyperscalers. What we're essentially landing on is a couple of things. One is the data centers paying much higher rates than the rest of the population because the cost of new electricity, of building new, is more than the average cost of the existing system, and they need to pay that rate, and they can. And so we, I say we, like, you know, when we advise our utilities, we say, hey, you know, jack up that rate for data centers. Google and others can pay, and we work with Google and others, and they agree they can pay, and they're happy to pay. So maybe not happy, but they will pay. So that works. Like, we got to keep consumers whole when bringing on data centers. But to your point, the other thing that we can do is have some pretty stringent requirements for data centers. And that includes things like heat recovery. That includes things like what we used to call interruptible rates, but basically saying to data centers, hey, you can take our power now, but if we need it because we have an event, right? There's a big storm, or, you know, temperature drops to -40 and we need the power on the grid, you're gonna stop using. You're going to take a pause, you're going to shift your data center demands over to some other location, and they can do that now. So we're incorporating that now almost systematically into contracts. And then the third thing is they can build on-site power, on-site or near-site power, and that can either be to supply all of their needs or to supply as backup, again, to enable them to pull out of the grid when the grid needs that power. So there's a lot of stuff that data centers can do. You just saw a deal in, I don't remember if it was Minnesota or Wisconsin, something like that. Google just signed a big deal that had all those ingredients in it. Quebec just adopted a new data center rate last week that has all of those pieces in it. BC is basically doing the same thing. So this is now becoming the new normal, and that's a really good thing. It's helping make it more reasonable more achievable to actually find the power and host those data centers without them burdening the grid or burdening consumers.
Thanks so much, everybody, for the questions. I think we're going to wrap it up there. Let's have a big round of applause for our great panel.